Three experienced hikers dangled from a frozen cliff face, their ropes severed, their fingers turning blue, their screams swallowed by a blizzard that didn't care if they lived or died. This wasn't an accident. Someone had cut their lines and left them to freeze. They had minutes, maybe less, before their grip failed and the mountain claimed them. But what the killer didn't know was that a lone figure was moving through that same storm. He wasn't just any hiker. He was Delta Force. And the 90-pound German Shepherd at his side wasn't just his companion. It was a trained search and rescue K9 who could smell fear, blood, and desperation through 6 feet of snow. The clock was ticking, and justice was about to arrive on 4 legs and 2 very dangerous hands. Before we begin, please tell us wherever in the world you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The San Juan Mountains of Colorado don't forgive mistakes. At 13,000 feet, where the air is thin and the cold cuts through every layer you wear, nature doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about your experience, your gear, or your plans. It just waits. And when you make that one wrong move, it takes you. But this story isn't about a mistake. This is about something far more sinister. This is about 3 people who were left to die not by nature, but by someone who believed the mountain would hide their crime. Someone who thought the storm would erase all evidence. They were wrong. Because on that same frozen ridge, moving through the same killing wind, was a man who had spent his entire life preparing for impossible situations. His name was Marcus Hale, and the world was about to learn that some warriors never really leave the battlefield. The cold at 13,000 feet isn't like anything you've ever felt before. It's not the kind of cold that makes you shiver and reach for a jacket. It's the kind that reaches inside your chest and squeezes. Every breath burns. Every exposed inch of skin feels like it's being stabbed with 1,000 tiny needles. And the wind, God, the wind doesn't just blow. It screams. It tears at you. It wants you gone. Marcus Hale knew this cold. He'd felt it in the Hindu Kush mountains of Afghanistan, where he'd spent 3 brutal tours with Delta Force, operating in conditions that would kill most men in hours. He'd felt it in his bones during night raids at 12,000 feet, where the cold was an enemy as dangerous as the Taliban fighters they hunted. But this morning, standing on the porch of his isolated cabin in Colorado's San Juan Mountains, Marcus wasn't thinking about Afghanistan. He was trying not to think about it at all. That was the whole point of being here. Marcus was 38 years old, though the lines around his eyes made him look older. He was built like a man who'd spent his entire adult life in the most demanding military unit on Earth. 6'2", lean and corded with muscle that came from function, not vanity. His hair was dark brown, cut military short out of habit, and his face had the kind of weathered look that came from years of harsh sun, brutal cold, and the weight of impossible decisions. His eyes were grey, the color of winter storms, and they held a stillness that made people uncomfortable. It was the look of a man who'd seen things, done things, things he was trying to forget. He'd been at this cabin for 2 months now. Medical discharge. Honorable, they said. Full benefits, they said. Thank you for your service, they said. What they didn't say was that he'd watched his entire team die in an ambush outside Kandahar 14 months ago. What they didn't say was that he'd been the only survivor, pulled from the wreckage with shrapnel in his shoulder and the screams of his brothers still echoing in his head. What they didn't say was that the nightmares came every single night, without fail, and that the only thing that kept him from eating his service pistol was the creature sitting beside him right now. Ghost. The German Shepherd sat at attention on Marcus's left, exactly where he'd been trained to sit, his dark eyes scanning the tree line with the same professional focus Marcus had. Ghost was a 90-pound masterpiece of muscle, intelligence, and loyalty. His coat was thick and dark, mostly black with rich tan markings on his legs and face. His ears stood perfectly erect, constantly swiveling to catch every sound. He'd been with Marcus for 4 years, trained specifically for special operations work. Search and rescue. explosive detection, attack and subdue. Ghost could do it all. But more than that, Ghost had been there. In that Humvee. In that ambush. The dog had taken shrapnel too, a piece that had torn through his left flank and nearly killed him. They'd recovered together in a military hospital in Germany, and when the doctors told Marcus he was being discharged, he'd made it clear that Ghost came with him or he wasn't going anywhere. The army had agreed, probably because they were afraid of what Marcus might do if they separated him from the only living thing that understood what he'd been through. Now they were here, in the middle of nowhere, exactly how Marcus wanted it. The cabin was small, rustic, owned by a friend from his unit who'd retired 5 years earlier and understood that sometimes a warrior needed silence more than comfort. It was a single room with a wood-burning stove, a narrow bed, a table, and not much else. No TV, no internet, just books, supplies, and the mountains. Marcus had spent the last 2 months establishing a routine. Wake at 0500, physical training, breakfast. Then he and Ghost would head out into the wilderness for what he called training exercises, but what was really just an excuse to move, to have a mission, to feel useful. They practiced navigation in whiteout conditions, survival shelter building, high-altitude endurance, emergency medical scenarios. Everything Marcus had once done with a team, he now did alone with his dog. It kept him sharp, kept him sane, gave him a reason to get up every morning. This morning was no different. The sun was just beginning to paint the peaks with pale pink light. The temperature was -12 degrees Fahrenheit. A storm was building in the west, dark clouds rolling over the mountains like a slow-motion avalanche. Marcus could feel it in the pressure behind his eyes, in the way the wind was shifting. They had maybe 6 hours before it hit. Perfect. He looked down at Ghost. "You ready, boy?" The dog's tail gave a single thump against the wooden porch. That was Ghost's version of enthusiasm. 4 years of working together meant Marcus could read every small movement, every tilt of the head, every shift in posture. They communicated in a language deeper than words. Marcus grabbed his pack from inside. It weighed 45 pounds, packed with everything they'd need for a full day in hostile terrain. Rope, carabiners, emergency medical kit, water purification, high-calorie rations, fire starter, shelter materials, communications, equipment, weapons. He didn't go into the mountains unprepared. Ever. That's how people died. They set out west, toward the higher peaks, moving at a steady pace that ate up miles. Ghost ranged ahead, never more than 50 yards, always checking back. Marcus's mind fell into the familiar rhythm of movement. Left foot, right foot, breathe, scan, assess. The warrior's meditation, the only time his brain truly quieted. What Marcus didn't know was that 10 miles away, 3 other people were also moving through these same mountains, and they were walking straight into a nightmare. Sarah Chen checked her GPS for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. The little blue dot on the screen showed they were right on course, following the trail that would take them to Eagle's Nest Ridge, a remote outcropping with stunning views and, more importantly, the location where David's confidential source had agreed to meet them. Sarah was 32, compact and strong, with straight black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She'd grown up in Denver, the daughter of immigrants who'd built a successful restaurant from nothing and instilled in her a work ethic that had carried her through medical school and into one of the toughest jobs in medicine. She was a trauma surgeon at Denver General, which meant she'd seen everything: gunshot wounds, stabbings, car accidents, overdoses. She'd held people's hearts in her hands, literally, and made split-second decisions that meant life or death. But here, in the mountains, she wasn't Dr. Chen. She was just Sarah, a woman who loved the wilderness, who'd been climbing these peaks since she was 16, and who was very much in love with the man walking beside her. Jake Morrison was 29, tall and lean with sandy brown hair and the kind of easy smile that made people trust him instantly. He was an environmental scientist, passionate about conservation in a way that Sarah found both admirable and occasionally exhausting. He could talk for hours about watershed ecosystems and wildlife corridors. He'd proposed to her 6 months ago on top of Mount Elbert, and she'd said yes before he'd even finished the question. They were planning a spring wedding. Small, just family and close friends. Maybe on a mountain. That would be perfect. Right now, though, Jake was looking less enthusiastic about their current hike. "Remind me again why we're doing this?" he asked, his breath pluming white in the freezing air. "It's December. There's a blizzard coming. We could be at home, drinking coffee, not risking frostbite." "Because," David asked, Sarah said simply. "And because what he's investigating matters." She gestured ahead to the third member of their group. David Grant was 41, with graying hair and the kind of intense focus that marked him as a man obsessed. He'd been an investigative journalist for 18 years, working for major papers in Chicago and New York before going independent 3 years ago. He'd broken stories on government corruption, corporate fraud, environmental crimes. He'd won awards, made enemies, received death threats, and he didn't stop. For the past 8 months, David had been investigating Castellano Enterprises, a massive real estate development corporation based in Denver and run by a billionaire named Victor Castellano. On the surface, Castellano was a philanthropist, a businessman, a pillar of the community. He donated to charities, sat on museum boards, smiled for cameras, but David had found something else. A pattern. Over the past 5 years, Castellano Enterprises had acquired more than 40 properties in the Colorado mountains, all in areas that were being rezoned for luxury resort development. Most of the sellers had been reluctant, had initially refused to sell. But then things started happening. A barn fire here, a suspicious car accident there, threatening letters, vandalism, break-ins, and suddenly, these stubborn property owners were willing to sell, usually at well below market value. Then, the deaths started. 7 people who'd owned land in Castellano's development zones had died in what were ruled accidents, falls, drownings, carbon monoxide poisoning. David didn't believe in coincidences. Not 7 of them. He'd spent months building his case, finding connections, tracking money, interviewing witnesses who were too terrified to go on record. And then, 3 weeks ago, he'd gotten the call. A former Castellano employee, a man named Thomas Whitaker who'd worked in their acquisition division, had reached out. He said he had evidence, documents, recordings, proof of a systematic campaign of intimidation, fraud, and murder. But he was terrified. He wouldn't meet in Denver, wouldn't meet anywhere near civilization. He insisted on Eagle's Nest Ridge, a place so remote that no one would see them, no one would know. David had agreed immediately, but he was smart enough to know he couldn't make this hike alone. He'd reached out to Sarah, whom he'd met 2 years ago when he'd done a story on emergency room overcrowding, and who'd mentioned her love of mountaineering. He'd offered to pay them. Sarah had refused the money but agreed to guide him. Jake had come along because there was no way he was letting his fiancée go into the wilderness with a journalist chasing a dangerous story without backup. Now here they were, 3 miles from the ridge, with a storm closing in and the temperature dropping by the minute. "David," Jake called ahead, "we need to talk about timing. That storm's going to hit in a few hours. If we're not off this mountain before it does, we're in serious trouble." David turned, his face flushed from exertion and cold. I know. But Whitaker was clear. "Noon, Eagle's Nest Ridge. If we're not there, he won't wait. This might be my only chance." "Your only chance to what?" Jake pressed. "Die of exposure?" "Look, I get that this story is important, but people are being murdered, Jake." David's voice was sharp, urgent. Families are being terrorized off their land, and the man doing it is worth $4 billion and has half the state government in his pocket. If I don't stop him, who will? Sarah held up a hand. "Nobody's saying we turn back. We're saying we need to be smart. We get to the ridge, you get your evidence, and then we descend fast. Deal?" David nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Deal. Thank you, both of you. I know I'm asking a lot." "You're asking the right amount," Sarah said, giving him a small smile. "Now let's keep moving. We're burning daylight." They continued up the trail, the wind picking up, the temperature dropping. None of them noticed the two men watching them from a ridge 800 yards away, tracking their progress through high-powered binoculars. The men weren't dressed like hikers. They wore tactical cold-weather gear, black and gray, designed for function, not fashion. One of them spoke quietly into a radio. "Control, this is Overwatch. Targets are 3 clicks from the site. ETA 45 minutes. Confirming 3 individuals, the journalist and 2 companions. Over." The radio crackled. A cold, professional voice responded. "Overwatch. This is Control. Maintain observation. Do not engage until they reach the primary site. We need confirmation that Whitaker provided no physical evidence before sanitization. Acknowledge. Control, Overwatch. Copy that. Maintain observation. Engage at primary site. Out." The man lowered the radio and glanced at his partner. "Croft's gonna make this messy. You know that, right?" His partner, a stocky man with a thick beard, shrugged. "Croft gets paid to be messy. We get paid to follow orders. They walk into that site. They don't walk out. Simple." "Nothing's ever simple," the first man muttered. But he raised the binoculars again, watching the 3 tiny figures below, completely unaware that they were being hunted. At the ridge, Thomas Whitaker was already dead. He'd arrived 2 hours early, carrying a weathered backpack filled with everything David Grant needed to destroy Victor Castellano: financial records, email chains, audio recordings of Castellano personally ordering violence against property owners, photos of shell corporations and money laundering. It was all there. Years of crime, documented and organized. Thomas had worked for Castellano for 7 years. He'd watched the company change, watched it become something dark. He'd been part of it. God help him, he'd been part of it. But 6 months ago, when he'd learned that a family with 2 small children had been threatened with arson if they didn't sell their ranch, he'd started copying files, started recording meetings, started building his exit strategy. He knew what would happen if Castellano found out. He knew the risk, but he had to do something. He had to make it right. He'd been waiting at the ridge for 30 minutes when the 4 men appeared. Not from the trail, but from the forest, moving like soldiers. Thomas had frozen, his heart dropping into his stomach. The lead man was tall, with pale blue eyes and a face like carved stone. His name was Croft, though Thomas didn't know that. Croft was a professional. Former military, former private security, current problem solver for people with money and dirty needs. "Thomas Whitaker," Croft had said, his voice flat and emotionless. "You're early." Thomas had run. God, he'd tried. But they'd caught him in less than 100 yards, dragged him back to the ridge, and Croft had asked him one question. "Did you give the journalist anything? Physical evidence? Digital copies?" Thomas had refused to answer, had begged, had offered to disappear, to leave the country, to never speak a word. Croft had shot him once, clean, professional. Then they'd taken his backpack and thrown his body off the cliff into a ravine where it wouldn't be found for months, if ever. "What about the journalist?" one of Croft's men had asked. Croft had checked his watch. "He'll be here in an hour. With witnesses. That complicates things. We could abort. Let him find nothing. He's got no evidence without Whitaker." Croft had considered that, then shaken his head. "He's too close. He's been digging for months. Even without Whitaker, he's a liability. And Mr. Castellano doesn't tolerate liabilities. We handle it here. Clean. Accident. The storm will cover everything." And so they'd waited, setting up, preparing, planning an execution. When Sarah, Jake, and David finally reached Eagle's Nest Ridge 45 minutes later, exhausted and freezing, they found nothing. No Thomas Whitaker, no evidence, just an empty, wind-swept outcropping of rock and snow. "He's not here," David said, his voice hollow with disappointment and growing fear. "He should be here." Jake was scanning the area, his scientist's mind noticing details. Disturbed snow. Boot prints. Too many boot prints. "David, we need to leave. Right now." "What? No. Maybe he's just late." Or, "David." Jake's voice was sharp. "Look at the snow. There were people here. Multiple people. Recently." Sarah saw it too. Her medical training had taught her to observe, to notice what didn't fit. And this didn't fit. The boot prints weren't from hiking boots. They were from tactical boots. Military-style treads. And there were signs of a struggle near the cliff edge. Scuff marks, disturbed snow, and something dark that might have been blood. "Oh, God," she whispered. "David, I think." That's when they heard the voice. "Nobody move." 4 men stepped out from the surrounding rocks and trees, rifles raised, faces hidden behind cold-weather masks. The lead man, Croft, pointed his weapon directly at David's chest. "David Grant, investigative journalist, always sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." Croft's voice was calm, almost conversational. "Thomas Whitaker isn't coming. He had an unfortunate accident about an hour ago. And I'm afraid you're about to have one too." David's face went white. "You killed him. You killed Thomas." "I did my job," Croft corrected. "Just like I'm about to do now. The 3 of you are going to have a tragic climbing accident. Terrible tragedy. You got caught in the storm, made a bad decision, and fell. These mountains claim lives every year. No one will question it." Sarah felt Jake's hand find hers, squeezing tight. Her mind was racing, looking for options, exits, anything. But they were surrounded, outgunned, miles from help. "Please," Jake said, his voice shaking. "Please, we won't say anything. We'll leave. We'll forget everything. Just let us go." Croft tilted his head. "See, I'd love to believe that. But Mr. Castellano pays me a lot of money to eliminate problems, not negotiate with them." He gestured to his men. "Secure them. Make it look right." What happened next was a blur of violence. The mercenaries moved fast, professional. When Jake tried to fight, one of them slammed a rifle butt into his stomach, dropping him to his knees, gasping. When Sarah tried to run, another grabbed her, twisting her arm behind her back until she cried out. David was forced to the ground, his face pressed into the snow. They bound them with rope, hands behind their backs, ankles tied together. Tight, efficient. The rope bit into Sarah's wrists, cutting off circulation. She was a surgeon, her hands were everything. And they were already going numb. Croft stood over them, checking his watch. "Here's what's going to happen. There's an old mining structure about 50 yards from here. Beam extends out over a 200-foot drop. We're going to tie you to that beam. Then we're going to cut the support ropes. You'll hang there until the wood fails or you freeze to death. Probably both. When the storm clears in a few days, they'll find 3 bodies at the bottom of a cliff. Climbing accident. Case closed." "You're a monster," Sarah spat, her fear transforming into rage. "I'm a professional," Croft corrected. "There's a difference. Now, let's move." They were dragged through the snow, stumbling, falling, pulled roughly to their feet. The old mining structure was exactly as Croft described, a relic from the 1800s, when these mountains had been full of desperate men searching for silver. A thick wooden beam extended out over the cliff edge, held up by rotting support posts and ancient rope. The mercenaries tied them to the beam, looping the rope around their bound bodies and securing them to the wood. Sarah was in the middle, with Jake on her left and David on her right. They were positioned so that they hung partially over the edge, their legs dangling over 200 feet of empty air. "Please," David begged, all his journalist's courage crumbling in the face of this horror. "Please don't do this." Croft drew a knife, the blade gleaming in the dim light. "Nothing personal, Mr. Grant. You just asked too many questions." He cut the first support rope. The beam lurched, dropping 6 inches. Sarah screamed. Jake was praying, words tumbling out in desperate, incoherent gasps. Croft cut the second rope. The beam dropped another foot, now held up by only one fraying line and the rotting posts. "The storm will finish what I started," Croft said. He looked at his men. "Let's move. We need to be off this mountain before weather closes in." And they left. Walked away. Left 3 human beings tied to a failing structure, hanging over a cliff in sub-zero temperatures with a blizzard bearing down on them. For a long moment, there was only silence. The wind, the creak of old wood, the pounding of their hearts. Then Sarah found her voice. "We have to get free. We have to try." "How?" Jake's voice was raw with terror. "We can't move. We can't reach the ropes. Sarah, we're going to die here." "No," she said it with every ounce of strength she had. "No, we're not. David, can you reach your pocket? Do you have anything sharp?" David was crying, his body shaking with cold and shock. I don't. There's nothing." The beam creaked, dropped another inch. They all felt it, felt the structure failing beneath them, felt the mountain claiming them, and the storm rolled in, swallowing them in white. Somewhere, 10 miles away, a German shepherd lifted his head, his ears swiveling toward a sound only he could hear. And a warrior who'd been trying to escape the war was about to discover that some battles find you, no matter how far you run. Ghost stopped dead in his tracks. 1 second he was moving through the snow with that fluid, ground-eating lope that Marcus had seen 1,000 times. The next, he was frozen. Every muscle in his powerful body locked tight, his ears snapped forward, his entire focus directed at something Marcus couldn't see, couldn't hear, couldn't sense. Marcus knew that posture. He'd seen it in Kandahar, when Ghost had detected an IED buried under 6 inches of dirt. He'd seen it in the mountains of Pakistan, when insurgents were lying in ambush 200 yards away. Ghost didn't freeze like that for a rabbit or a deer or the wind playing tricks. Ghost froze like that when something was wrong. Marcus's hand went instinctively to the pistol at his hip, his body automatically shifting into a tactical crouch. His eyes swept the terrain, looking for threats, for movement, for anything out of place. They were 4 miles from the cabin now, deep in the back country, in terrain so remote that most people never saw it. The storm was building fast, the wind picking up, snow beginning to fall in thick, heavy flakes that reduced visibility to maybe 50 yards. "What is it, boy?" Marcus's voice was low, calm, the same tone he'd used in 100 combat situations. "What do you got?" Ghost didn't look back at him. The dog's nose was working, his head moving slightly from side to side, sampling the air. Then he did something that made Marcus's blood run cold. He barked, not the alert bark he used for wildlife, not the warning bark he used when strangers approached. This was the combat bark, the one that meant danger, the one that meant people were in trouble. Marcus didn't question it. 4 years of working with this dog, 4 years of trusting him with his life, meant that when Ghost said something was wrong, something was wrong. Marcus pulled his GPS unit from his pocket, marked their current position, and gestured forward. "Show me. Track." Ghost took off immediately, not running but moving with purpose, his nose to the ground and then lifting to test the air. Marcus followed, his mind already shifting into operator mode. Adrenaline sharpened his senses, his breathing steadied, the tremor that sometimes lived in his hands disappeared. This was what he was built for. This was what his body remembered even when his mind wanted to forget. They moved through the forest, Ghost leading, Marcus following, and slowly the signs became clear. Boot prints in the snow, partially filled but still visible. Multiple sets, fresh, maybe an hour old. Not hikers. The tread pattern was wrong. These were tactical boots, military or paramilitary. Marcus had seen enough boot prints in Afghanistan to know the difference between someone out for a pleasant walk and someone on a mission. His gut tightened. Out here? Miles from anywhere? In a building storm? Nobody was out here by accident. Ghost led him up a steep incline, through a dense stand of pines, and then stopped at the edge of a clearing. Marcus moved up beside him, dropping to one knee, using the tree line as cover. What he saw made his blood freeze. An old mining structure, the kind that dotted these mountains, relics from the 1800s that should have been torn down decades ago. A thick wooden beam extended out over what Marcus knew was a cliff edge, though he couldn't see the drop through the snow. And hanging from that beam, tied with rope, suspended over empty air, were 3 people. 3 human beings, bound, left to die. Marcus's mind went into full tactical assessment mode, processing information at lightning speed. Range, 50 yards. Visibility, poor and getting worse. Wind, 15 miles per hour, gusting to 25. Temperature, dropping fast, probably -15 with wind chill. The structure was failing. He could see it even from here. The support ropes were cut, the wooden posts were rotting, and the whole thing was held together by hope and physics that were rapidly giving out. The people hanging there weren't moving much. Hypothermia. Advanced stage. They had minutes, not hours, maybe less. Marcus scanned the area for threats. The boot prints led away, back down the mountain. Whoever did this was gone, probably trying to get off the mountain before the storm trapped them too. But that didn't mean they wouldn't come back, didn't mean they weren't watching. He pulled out his compact binoculars, scanning the ridgelines, looking for the glint of a scope, the shape of a person. Nothing. The storm was his cover and theirs. He had to assume he was alone, had to assume this was a solo operation with no backup and no support. 3 civilians, exposed position, failing structure, unknown hostiles potentially in the area. Every part of his training said this was a trap, said he should call for help and establish a perimeter and wait for backup. But there was no backup, and those people had minutes. Marcus looked down at Ghost. The dog was staring at the 3 figures, a low whine escaping his throat. Even the dog understood. They were dying. Right now. Right in front of them. "We're going in," Marcus said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was a decision. "But we do this smart. I go forward. You stay here. Rear guard. Alert. Understand?" Ghost sat immediately, his eyes locked on Marcus. The dog understood. He'd guard their exit route. He'd watch their backs. He'd do his job while Marcus did his. Marcus checked his gear. Rope, carabiners, knife, medical kit, pistol. He pulled his balaclava up over his face, covering everything but his eyes. Then he moved, not directly toward the structure but angling, using the terrain, staying low, moving fast. Tactical approach. Always assume you're being watched. Always assume the enemy has the high ground. He reached the structure and pressed himself against one of the rotting support posts. Up close, it was even worse than he'd thought. The wood was ancient, soft with decay. The ropes were frayed. The whole thing could collapse any second. And the 3 people tied to the beam were in bad shape. He could see it now. Blue lips, pale skin, shallow breathing. The woman in the middle had her eyes closed. The man on the left was mumbling something. Prayers, maybe. The man on the right was staring at Marcus with eyes that held no hope, just the dull acceptance of death. "I'm here to help," Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through the wind. "Stay still. Don't move. I'm going to get you down." The man on the right blinked, like he wasn't sure Marcus was real. You're real? "I'm real." "What happened?" They tried to kill us, tied us here, left us." The man's voice was slurred, hypothermia stealing his words. "You need to go. They'll come back. They'll kill you too." "Nobody's killing anybody," Marcus said, and he meant it. He moved to the beam, assessing the setup. The 3 victims were tied to the beam itself, which was tied to the structure with one remaining support rope that looked like it could snap if Marcus breathed on it too hard. Below them was a 200-foot drop onto rocks and snow. One wrong move, and they all died. No pressure. Marcus pulled his climbing rope from his pack. Military grade, rated for £1,000. He worked fast, his fingers moving with practiced precision despite the cold. He set an anchor in the solid rock behind the structure, a bomber placement that would hold an elephant. Then he clipped himself in, creating a safety system. He wasn't going over that cliff if the whole thing collapsed. Next, he moved to the victims. The woman first. She was unconscious or close to it, which meant she was the most critical. He cut the rope, binding her to the beam, catching her weight as she slumped forward. She was light, maybe 110 pounds, but dead weight felt like twice that. He clipped her to his safety line with a carabiner, securing her. "Hold on," he whispered, not even sure she could hear him. "Just hold on." The structure groaned. The beam shifted, dropping another 2 inches. The man on the left screamed, a raw sound of pure terror. Marcus moved faster. He cut the second man free, the one who'd been praying, clipped him to the safety line. Then the third man, the journalist, who was crying now, sobbing with relief and fear and shock. "I've got you," Marcus said, his voice steady, calm, the voice of command. "But we have to move. Now." He started hauling them back, pulling against the rope, using his body weight and strength to drag 3 hypothermic, injured people away from the cliff edge. The structure was collapsing behind them, the beam tilting, the posts giving way. Marcus heard the crack of wood, felt the vibration through the ground. He pulled harder. His muscles screamed. His shoulder, the one that still had shrapnel in it, sent bolts of white-hot pain through his back. He didn't care. He pulled. The beam collapsed, fell, disappeared over the cliff edge with a sound like thunder. But Marcus had them, all 3, clear of the edge, safe. He collapsed onto his back in the snow, his lungs burning, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a moment, he just breathed. Then training took over. He rolled to his feet and started triaging. The woman, critical. He checked her pulse, weak and thready, breathing shallow. He cut the ropes binding her hands and feet. Her wrists were raw and bloody, circulation cut off. Her fingers were waxy white. Frostbite. Advanced. He rubbed them gently, trying to restore blood flow, knowing he might be too late to save them. He pulled emergency heat packs from his medical kit, cracking them to activate the chemical reaction. He placed them against her torso, under her arms, against her neck, core warming. It was the only way to bring her back from this level of hypothermia. The first man, the one who'd been praying, conscious, responsive, hypothermia but not critical. Marcus cut his bonds, gave him heat packs, wrapped him in an emergency blanket from his pack. The third man, the journalist. Shock, emotional trauma, but physically better than the other 2. Marcus gave him the same treatment. Heat, blankets, reassurance. "What's your name?" Marcus asked him. "D. David." "David Grant. The woman is Sarah. The man is Jake. They're engaged. Are they going to die?" "Not if I can help it," Marcus said. "Who did this to you?" David's face crumpled. "A man named Croft. Works for Victor Castellano. We were meeting a source. They killed him. They were going to kill us. Make it look like an accident." Every word was important. This wasn't random. This was an execution, which meant the people who did it would come back, would verify the kill, would finish the job. Marcus looked up at the sky. The storm was fully upon them now, snow falling so thick he could barely see 20 feet. The temperature was plummeting. They couldn't stay here, and they couldn't make it back to his cabin, not with 2 people who could barely walk and a third who was unconscious. But Marcus had prepared for this. He'd spent 2 months in these mountains, and one of the first things he'd done was establish emergency cache points, supplies hidden in strategic locations, shelter, food, medical gear. There was one 300 yards from here, a snow cave he'd dug and reinforced, stocked with everything they'd need to survive. "Can you walk?" Marcus asked David. David nodded, though he looked like he might collapse any second. Marcus looked at Jake, who was shivering violently but conscious. "You? I'll make it." Jake said through chattering teeth. Good, because I can't carry all of you. Marcus looked down at Sarah, the unconscious woman. She's critical. I'm carrying her. You two follow. Stay close. If you fall behind, you die. Understand? They understood. Marcus scooped Sarah into his arms, cradling her against his chest. She weighed nothing. He'd carried wounded soldiers through worse. He'd carried Ghost when the dog had taken shrapnel and couldn't walk. He could do this. He whistled. The sound cut through the storm. Ghost appeared from the tree line, materializing out of the snow like a shadow. The dog moved to Marcus's side, and then did something that made David and Jake stare in shock. Ghost walked over to Sarah, the unconscious woman in Marcus's arms, and licked her face gently. Once, twice. Then he positioned himself on Marcus's left, the exact formation they'd used in Afghanistan when moving with wounded. Let's move, Marcus said. And they did. The trek to the snow cave was the longest 300 yards of Marcus's life. The storm was a living thing now, a white wall that swallowed the world. Visibility was zero. The cold was a physical enemy, stealing heat, stealing strength, stealing life. Marcus navigated by memory and GPS, his body on autopilot, his mind focused on one thing. Keep moving. David fell twice. Jake pulled him up. Jake fell once. Ghost nudged him with his nose until he stood. Sarah didn't wake, and Marcus felt her body getting colder despite the heat packs. Hypothermia was winning. Time was running out. But then, through the white, Marcus saw it. The entrance to the snow cave, marked with a small cairn of stones that he'd stacked himself. He dropped to his knees, pushing aside the snow that had drifted across the opening, and crawled inside. The cave was exactly as he'd left it. A space about 12 feet by 8, carved into a snowbank and reinforced with branches and a tarp. Inside, sealed containers held sleeping bags, food, a portable stove, medical supplies, and dry clothes. It was cold, but it was shelter. It was out of the wind. It was survival. Marcus laid Sarah down on one of the sleeping bags and immediately started pulling out supplies. More heat packs, a thermal blanket, dry base layers. He stripped off her wet clothes, her fingers so cold they felt like ice, and dressed her in dry layers. Then he zipped her into a sleeping bag rated for -40 degrees and piled more blankets on top. Jake, Marcus said, get in the other sleeping bag. Share body heat with her. It's the fastest way to warm her. Jake didn't hesitate. He climbed into the sleeping bag with his fiancée, wrapping his arms around her, sharing his warmth, whispering into her hair. Marcus turned to David and tossed him dry clothes. Change, everything. If it's wet, it comes off. While they changed, Marcus lit the portable stove and started melting snow for water. Hydration was critical. So was warmth. He opened rations, military MREs that tasted like cardboard but packed enough calories to fuel a body through hell. Ghost settled near the entrance, his body blocking the opening, his ears alert. He was on guard. He was doing his job. For the first time in 3 hours, Marcus let himself breathe. They were alive, all of them. Against odds that should have killed them, they were alive. But then, Sarah started to seize. Her body convulsed, her eyes rolling back, foam appearing at her lips. Hypothermia seizure. Marcus had seen it before. It meant her core temperature had dropped so low that her brain was shutting down. Marcus moved fast. He pulled her from the sleeping bag and laid her flat. He checked her airway, made sure she wasn't choking. Then, he did the only thing that would work. He stripped off his own outer layers, opened the sleeping bag, and climbed in with her, pulling Jake back in too. 3 bodies. Maximum heat transfer. It was called the sandwich method, and it was the most effective way to re-warm a hypothermia victim in the field. Talk to her, Marcus told Jake. Keep talking. Let her know you're here. Jake did. He whispered to her about their wedding plans, about the house they were going to buy, about the life they were going to have. His voice was shaking, but he kept talking, and slowly, Over the next hour, Sarah's body stopped shaking. Her breathing steadied. Her pulse strengthened. She was coming back. Marcus finally extracted himself from the sleeping bag and sat back, exhausted. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline crash hitting him hard. But they were alive. All of them. David was staring at him from across the small cave. "Who are you?" Marcus met his eyes. "My name is Marcus Hale. You're not just a hiker." "No. What are you?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm someone who was in the wrong place at the right time." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got." But David was an investigative journalist. He'd built a career on asking questions until he found the truth. "You moved like a soldier. You had equipment, training. Your dog." He looked at Ghost, who was still on watch. "That's a military working dog. Special operations. You're Delta Force. Or you were." Marcus didn't confirm or deny. He just looked at David. "Tell me everything. Who did this to you? And why?" So David told him. The whole story poured out. Victor Castellano, the land fraud scheme, the intimidation, the murders, Thomas Whitaker, the source who was supposed to meet them but who was probably dead, Croft, the man who'd tied them to that beam and left them to freeze, the conspiracy that went all the way to the top of Colorado politics and business. Marcus listened, his face impassive, his mind working. He'd spent 10 years in Delta Force. He knew how these operations worked. This wasn't just corporate greed. This was organized, professional. The men who'd done this were trained, which meant Castellano had money and connections that went deep. "You said Croft cut you loose and left," Marcus said. "That means he thinks you're dead, or will be soon." "So we're safe?" Jake asked hopefully. "No," Marcus said flatly. "We're not. Men like Croft verify their kills. When the storm clears, he'll come back. He'll look for bodies. When he doesn't find them, he'll know you're alive. And then he'll hunt you." The words hung in the cold air of the cave. Sarah, who had finally regained consciousness, made a small sound of fear. Jake held her tighter. "So what do we do?" David asked, his voice small. Marcus looked at Ghost, then back at the 3 civilians who'd just survived the impossible. He thought about the peace he'd come to these mountains to find. He thought about the war he'd left behind. He thought about his team, the men who'd died in that ambush, and the promise he'd made to himself to honor them by living a quiet life. But some promises couldn't be kept when people needed help. "We prepare," Marcus said, his voice hard as stone. "Because when they come back, we're going to be ready." For the next 6 hours, as the storm raged outside and the temperature dropped to deadly levels, Marcus transformed 3 terrified civilians into something resembling a unit. He started with medical care. Sarah was a surgeon, and once she'd recovered enough to think clearly, her medical knowledge became invaluable. Together, she and Marcus treated everyone's injuries: frostbite, rope burns, bruises, cuts. Marcus showed her what he had in his kit, and Sarah's eyes widened. "This is a military field medical kit," she said, holding up a package of quick-clot gauze. "The advanced kind. You're not just a soldier, you're a combat medic." "I'm a lot of things," Marcus said simply. "Right now, I'm your best chance at staying alive." He made them eat, forced calories into them even when they said they weren't hungry. Food was fuel. Fuel was survival. He made them drink, constantly, fighting the dehydration that came with extreme cold. Then he started teaching them. "You need to understand something," Marcus said, his voice calm but firm. "The men who did this to you are professionals. They're trained, they're armed, and they're going to come back. Maybe tomorrow, maybe the day after. But they will come, and when they do, you have 3 choices: run, hide, or fight." "We're not fighters," Jake said, his voice shaking. "You are now," Marcus corrected, "because the alternative is death. So I'm going to teach you. Basic survival combat. Not how to win, just how to not die." He showed them how to move quietly through snow, how to use terrain for cover, how to fall and roll to avoid injury. He taught them how to use improvised weapons. A rock, a stick, ice packed into a hard ball. He taught them pressure points on the human body, places where even a weak strike could cause temporary incapacitation. He showed David how to set a simple snare trap using paracord from his kit. Showed Jake how to create a noise alarm using tin cans and wire. Showed Sarah how to treat a gunshot wound with limited supplies. "You're turning us into soldiers," David said, watching Marcus demonstrate a joint lock technique. "I'm turning you into survivors," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. Ghost was part of the training too." Marcus showed them how to read the dog's body language. Ears forward meant alert. Hackles raised meant threat. Low growl meant danger was close. And if Ghost barked, they ran. No questions, no hesitation. "He's not a pet," Marcus explained, scratching behind Ghost's ears. "He's a weapon, a tool. And right now, he's the best early warning system we have." As they worked, they talked. Stories emerged. Sarah told them about her parents, immigrants who'd built a life from nothing. Jake talked about his research, his love for the wilderness. David spoke about his career, the stories he'd broken, the people he'd helped. And slowly, Marcus told them pieces of his own story. Afghanistan, Delta Force, the ambush, the loss, the guilt, the nightmares. He didn't tell them everything. Couldn't. Some things were still classified, some things were still too raw. But he told them enough. Enough for them to understand who he was, what he was. "You came here to escape the war," Sarah said quietly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "And we brought it right to your door." "No," Marcus said. "Croft brought it. Castellano brought it. You're just people who got caught in the crossfire. But here's the thing." He looked at each of them in turn. "I'm good at war. It's the peace I'm bad at. So maybe this is where I'm supposed to be." Outside, the storm finally began to break. The wind died down. The snow slowed to flurries. The sky started to lighten. Marcus moved to the entrance of the cave and looked out. Dawn was coming. The world was white and clean and beautiful. And somewhere, out there, men with guns were preparing to come back and finish what they'd started. "How long do we have?" David asked from behind him. Marcus checked his watch. "They'll wait for the storm to fully clear. Give it another 6 hours, maybe 8. They'll want good visibility. They're hunters. They'll want to see their prey. And then?" Marcus looked back at them. 3 people who should have died yesterday. 3 people who were alive because of a dog's instincts and a soldier's training. 3 people who were now his responsibility. "Then we give them something they're not expecting," Marcus said, a cold smile touching his lips. "We give them a fight." He moved back into the cave and started pulling out the rest of his gear. The things he'd hoped he'd never have to use again. The tools of war. As he worked, Ghost moved to his side, and Marcus rested his hand on the dog's head. "One more mission, boy," Marcus whispered. "One more." Ghost's tail thumped once against the snow. Outside, the sun rose over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. It was going to be a beautiful day, and somewhere, 8 miles away, a man named Croft was loading his rifle and gathering his team, ready to return to Eagle's Nest Ridge and confirm 3 kills. He had no idea that the war was about to come to him. The sun was 2 hours above the horizon when Ghost gave the first warning. His ears snapped forward, his body going rigid, that low rumble starting deep in his chest. Marcus was on his feet instantly, his hand finding his pistol, his eyes scanning the white wilderness beyond their position. "They're here," he said quietly. They'd spent the morning preparing. Marcus had moved them from the snow cave to a defensive position he'd scouted at first light, a small ridge with good sightlines, natural cover from the rocks, and multiple escape routes. He'd positioned David and Jake behind a fallen log, gave them each a heavy branch that could serve as a weapon. Sarah, despite her frost-bitten fingers, had insisted on staying mobile, ready to provide medical support if anyone got hurt. Marcus was prone on the ridge, his rifle resting on his pack, his eye to the scope. And there they were. 4 figures moving through the snow, spread out in a tactical formation, rifles at the ready. They were heading back to Eagle's Nest Ridge, back to where they'd left 3 people to die, back to verify the kill. Croft was in the lead. Even from 800 yards, Marcus could see the professional way he moved, the way he scanned, the way he communicated with his team using hand signals. This wasn't some amateur thug. This was a trained operator. Former military, Marcus would bet his life on it. Probably special forces. Probably someone who'd walked the same roads Marcus had, just chose a different path when he got out. How many? David whispered from behind cover. 4. Same as before. They're heading to the cliff site. Marcus pulled back from the scope and looked at his small, unlikely unit. Here's what's going to happen. They'll reach the cliff, see the structure collapsed, see no bodies at the bottom because the snow's covered everything. They'll realize you survived. Then they'll start tracking. They'll find the blood trail from where I carried you. They'll find boot prints, and they'll follow them here. So we run, Jake said, his voice tight with fear. No, Marcus said flatly. We can't outrun them. Not with your condition. Not in this terrain. They're professionals. They'll hunt us down one by one. Our only chance is to take the fight to them on ground we choose, with advantages we create. You want us to fight them? Sarah's voice was incredulous. Marcus, they have guns. We have sticks. They have guns and training, Marcus corrected. But we have something they don't. We have ghost. We have terrain knowledge. We have surprise. And we have something else. He looked at each of them. We have nothing to lose. They think you're already dead. That makes you dangerous. David was staring at the distant figures. What do we do? Marcus laid it out like a military briefing. Simple, clear, direct. He'd set traps along the most likely approach routes. Snares made from paracord that would catch feet and send a man tumbling. Deadfalls rigged with branches that would swing down when a tripwire was disturbed. Noise alarms made from tin cans that would give away positions. Nothing lethal, but enough to slow them down, make them cautious, make them afraid. I'll take point, Marcus said. I'll engage them directly, draw their fire, keep them focused on me. Ghost will be mobile, flanking. When I give him the command, he'll attack. That's when they'll be most vulnerable. That's when you 3 move. You don't fight, unless you have no choice. Your job is to survive and get to the emergency cache I showed you. There's a satellite phone there. You call for help. You get federal authorities involved. FBI, DEA, people Castellano can't buy. You understand? They understood. They were terrified, but they understood. One more thing, Marcus said, his voice dropping. If something happens to me, if I go down, you don't come back for me. You run. You get that evidence to people who can use it. You make this mean something. Promise me. Marcus, Sarah started. Promise me. They promised. Even though they all knew it was a lie. Even though they all knew that none of them would leave him behind. They'd survive together. They'd die together if it came to that. Marcus checked his watch. They'll be here in 30 minutes. Get in position. Stay quiet. Stay ready. The next 28 minutes were the longest of David Grant's life. He crouched behind that fallen log, his hands gripping a thick branch, his heart hammering so hard he thought it would give away their position. Beside him, Jake was praying again, whispering words under his breath. Sarah was 10 feet away, pressed against a boulder, her surgeon's hands shaking with cold and fear and the weight of what was about to happen. Marcus was a different person now. The quiet, gentle man who'd saved them, who'd warmed them back to life, who'd taught them how to survive, was gone. In his place was something harder, something cold, a warrior. David could see it in the way he moved, fluid and precise, in the way his eyes never stopped scanning, calculating, assessing. This was a man who'd killed before. Who would kill again if he had to? Ghost was beside him, a black and tan shadow, perfectly still, perfectly focused, waiting for the command that would unleash him. And then they came. The first mercenary stepped into the clearing, his rifle sweeping the area. He was maybe 40 yards away, close enough that David could see his face, see the cold professionalism in his eyes. The man moved forward, and his boot caught the tripwire Marcus had set. The snare whipped tight around his ankle, yanking his leg out from under him. He went down hard, his rifle flying from his hands, his scream of pain and surprise echoing through the trees. Marcus moved. He was up and running before the man hit the ground, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The mercenary was reaching for his sidearm when Marcus hit him, a brutal knee strike to the face that snapped the man's head back and sent him into unconsciousness. Marcus stripped the rifle, cleared the chamber, and took up position behind a tree. The other 3 mercenaries reacted instantly. Gunfire erupted, bullets tearing through the air, splintering wood, kicking up snow, but Marcus was already gone, moving to a different position, using the terrain, making himself impossible to pin down. "Contact left," one of the mercenaries shouted. "Flanking position." They were spreading out, trying to surround him. Professional tactics, fire, and maneuver. These weren't amateurs. Marcus whistled. A sharp, 2-tone command. Ghost exploded from cover, a 90-pound missile of fur and fury. He hit the second mercenary from the side, his jaws clamping down on the man's forearm, the arm holding the rifle. The man screamed, trying to shake the dog off, but Ghost's bite was a vice. The rifle fell. The man went down, trying to protect his throat as Ghost maintained his grip, dragging him backward, away from his weapon. Croft saw what was happening. His face twisted with rage. He swung his rifle toward the dog. "No!" Marcus shouted, breaking cover, firing 3 rounds. The shots went wide intentionally, kicking up snow at Croft's feet, forcing him to dive for cover. Marcus wasn't trying to kill him. Not yet. He needed Croft alive, needed him to testify, needed him to bring down Castellano's whole operation, but Croft wasn't interested in testifying. He rolled behind a boulder and came up firing, his shots controlled and accurate. Too accurate. 1 round caught Marcus in the left shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him to 1 knee. Pain exploded through Marcus's body, white-hot and overwhelming. He'd been shot before, in Afghanistan, knew what it felt like. This was bad. Not fatal, but bad. He pressed his hand to the wound, felt the hot blood soaking through his jacket. Croft was advancing now, moving with the confidence of a man who knew he'd just won. "You should have stayed out of this," he called out, his voice calm. "Should have let them die. Now you get to join them." That's when Sarah Chen did something incredibly brave and incredibly stupid. She stepped out from behind her boulder, completely exposed, and threw a rock, a fist-sized chunk of granite that she'd been holding for the last 10 minutes. It flew through the air and caught Croft square in the temple. Not hard enough to knock him out, but hard enough to stagger him, to make him turn, to give Marcus the opening he needed. Marcus surged to his feet, ignoring the screaming pain in his shoulder. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides. His military training took over, muscle memory from 1,000 hours of hand-to-hand combat drills. He deflected Croft's rifle with his good arm, stepped inside his guard, and delivered a devastating elbow strike to the man's throat. Croft gagged, stumbling backward, his hands going to his neck. Marcus didn't stop. A kick to the knee, buckling the leg, a palm strike to the nose, blood exploding, another strike to the temple. Croft went down, hard, and Marcus was on top of him, his knee on the man's chest, his pistol pressed against his forehead. "Don't move," Marcus growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Don't even breathe wrong." The fight was over in seconds. The 4th mercenary, seeing his leader down, Ghost still savaging his partner, and one of his team unconscious, dropped his rifle and raised his hands. "Don't shoot! I'm done! I surrender!" Jake, his hands shaking so hard he could barely hold his branch, moved forward and kicked the rifle away. David was there too, his face pale but determined, helping to secure the surrendered mercenary with zip ties from Marcus's pack. Ghost released his bite on the second mercenary, who was crying, cradling his mangled arm. Sarah, her surgeon's instincts overriding everything else, moved to help him despite everything he'd tried to do to her. "Apply pressure here," she told David, showing him where to hold the makeshift bandage. "Keep him stable. He's not going to die, but he needs a hospital." Marcus stayed focused on Croft. The man was glaring at him with pure hatred, blood streaming from his broken nose. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Croft spat. "Castellano will bury you. He has judges, cops, politicians. You think you've won? You've just signed your own death warrant." "No," Marcus said quietly. "I've just signed yours. You're going to tell the FBI everything. Every job, every payment, every order Castellano gave. You're going to burn his entire operation to the ground." "I'm not telling you anything." Marcus leaned closer, his grey eyes cold as winter stone. "Then you're going to prison for 3 counts of attempted murder. And I'm going to make sure every inmate in that facility knows you're the man who tried to kill a woman and left her to freeze to death. Let's see how long you last." For the first time, fear flickered across Croft's face. He understood. He was done. His options were cooperate or die, either from the law or from what waited for him in a prison cell. "I want a deal," Croft said, his voice losing its confidence. "Full immunity." "You'll get what you deserve," Marcus said. "But first, you're going to tell me everything." 2 hours later, they sat in the snow cave, wrapped in emergency blankets, while Marcus used the satellite phone to make the call that would change everything. His shoulder was bandaged, Sarah having used her surgical skills to clean and dress the wound. It needed real medical attention. Needed surgery, probably. But Marcus had survived worse. The phone connected. A professional voice answered. "FBI Rocky Mountain Field Office. Special Agent Rodriguez speaking. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm a former Delta Force operator. I have 4 suspects in custody involved in multiple counts of attempted murder, conspiracy, and organized crime. I also have 3 witnesses and evidence that connects to an ongoing investigation into Castellano Enterprises. We need immediate extraction and federal protection for the witnesses." There was a pause. Then Rodriguez's voice sharpened with focus. "Location?" Marcus gave him the coordinates. "We're in the back country. You'll need helicopter extraction. And Agent Rodriguez? The suspects include a man named Croft who's ready to flip on Victor Castellano. You'll want to bring a prosecutor. This is big." "Understood. Extraction team will be airborne in 20 minutes. ETA to your location 90 minutes. Sit tight, Mr. Hale. Help is coming." Marcus ended the call and looked at his unlikely team. David was holding Sarah's hand. Jake had his arm around both of them. Ghost was lying at Marcus's feet, exhausted but alert. They were alive, battered and traumatized and fundamentally changed, but alive. "What happens now?" David asked. "Now," Marcus said, "you tell your story. You expose Castellano. You make sure Thomas Whitaker didn't die for nothing. Will it be enough?" Sarah's voice was small. "Will people believe us?" Marcus looked at Croft, sitting zip-tied in the corner, his bravado completely gone. "They'll believe him, because the alternative is spending the rest of his life in a federal prison. Men like Croft always choose survival. And right now, his survival depends on bringing down Castellano." The helicopters arrived exactly 90 minutes later. 2 Black Hawks, federal markings, carrying FBI agents and medical personnel. They loaded the injured mercenaries first, under guard. Then Croft, shackled and silent. Then David, Jake, and Sarah, wrapped in thermal blankets, being checked by paramedics. Special Agent Rodriguez, a serious-faced man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached Marcus. "Mr. Hale, hell of a situation you walked into. Just in the wrong place at the right time," Marcus said. Rodriguez looked at Ghost, at Marcus's bandaged shoulder, at the defensive position Marcus had created. "You were Delta?" you said? Was. Well, on behalf of the Bureau, thank you. These witnesses are crucial. The information they have, combined with what Crofts already started telling us, it's enough to bring down Castellano's entire operation. We're talking RICO charges, conspiracy, murder. This case has been building for 2 years. You just handed us the missing pieces. Marcus nodded. He was tired, so tired. His shoulder throbbed, his body ached. All he wanted was to go back to his cabin, to his silence, to his peace. But Rodriguez wasn't done. We'll need your statement. Full debriefing. You'll probably have to testify. I know. And Mr. Hale, you saved 3 lives. You stopped 4 dangerous criminals. In my book, that makes you a hero. Marcus looked over at David, Sarah, and Jake being loaded onto the helicopter. They were looking back at him, their faces filled with gratitude and something else, something that looked like hope. I'm not a hero, Marcus said quietly. I'm just a soldier who couldn't walk away. The trial of Victor Castellano became the biggest news story in Colorado in a decade. The evidence was overwhelming. Crofts' testimony, combined with David's investigation, Sarah and Jake's witness accounts, and the physical evidence of the attempted murder, painted a picture of a criminal enterprise that stretched back years. 7 murders, 43 cases of fraud, intimidation, bribery, corruption at every level. Castellano tried to fight it. He hired the best lawyers money could buy. He called in favors from politicians. He tried to discredit the witnesses, but the evidence was ironclad. Croft had given up everything: names, dates, bank accounts, recordings. It was over. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Marcus attended every day, sitting in the back row, watching. David sat in the front, his notebook in hand, documenting everything. Sarah and Jake were there too, holding hands, their testimony delivered with quiet strength. When the jury returned with a guilty verdict on all counts, the courtroom erupted. Victor Castellano, the billionaire philanthropist, the pillar of the community, was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison. No parole, no deals. His empire was dismantled, his assets seized, his name destroyed. The families of his victims cried with relief. The people he'd terrorized finally felt safe. Justice, slow and imperfect, had been served. 6 months after the trial, Marcus stood on the porch of his cabin, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Ghost was beside him, as always. But today, they weren't alone. A car pulled up the dirt road, and 3 people got out. Sarah and Jake, wearing matching winter jackets, looking healthy and happy. And David, carrying a thick envelope. "Hope you don't mind the visit," David called out. "We brought coffee." They sat on the porch, drinking coffee that Sarah had made, watching the mountains paint themselves in morning light. It felt comfortable. It felt right. Over the past months, they'd stayed in touch. Phone calls, messages. They'd become something Marcus hadn't had in a long time. Friends, family. "So," David said, pulling a book from the envelope. "It's done. Publisher releases it next month." The cover showed the San Juan Mountains in winter. The title read, "The Ghost and the Mountain: How a Soldier and His Dog Saved 3 Lives and Exposed a Killer." David Grant's name was at the bottom, but in smaller letters it said, "Dedicated to Marcus Hale and Ghost, who taught us that courage is choosing to act when everyone else walks away." Marcus held the book, running his hand over the cover. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes, I did," David said. "Your story matters. What you did matters. People need to know that heroes still exist." Sarah leaned forward. "Marcus, Jake and I are getting married next month. Spring wedding. On a mountain, like we always planned. We want you there, both of you." She smiled at Ghost. "We want you to walk me down the aisle. You gave me a second chance at life. I want you to be part of the life I'm building." Marcus felt something break inside him, something that had been frozen for a long time. The guilt, the isolation, the belief that he didn't deserve peace. It cracked, and through the crack came light. "I'd be honored," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Jake grinned. "Good. Because we're not taking no for an answer. Also, we're starting a foundation, the Thomas Whitaker Memorial Fund. It'll provide legal support for families fighting corporate intimidation. We want you on the board." "I'm not a businessman," Marcus said. "No," Sarah agreed. "But you're someone who protects people. That's what this is about." They talked for hours, making plans, sharing stories, healing together. As the sun climbed higher, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Not the purpose of war, of missions and targets and orders, but something deeper. The purpose of building instead of destroying, of protecting instead of fighting. Before they left, David pulled Marcus aside. "Can I ask you something? That day in the snow, when you found us, you were on leave. You were trying to heal. Why did you risk everything to save 3 strangers?" Marcus looked at Ghost, at the mountains, at the cabin that had become his sanctuary. "Because Ghost told me to," he said. "And because sometimes the thing you need to heal isn't silence, it's purpose. You gave me that. Thank you." "No," David said, his eyes bright. "Thank you." As they drove away, Marcus stood on the porch with Ghost at his side. The mountains stretched forever, beautiful and unforgiving and eternal. He'd come here broken, seeking peace. He'd found war instead, but through that war, he'd found something better. He'd found a reason to keep fighting, not with weapons, not with violence, but with courage, compassion, and the unwavering belief that one person could still make a difference. Marcus knelt down and scratched behind Ghost's ears. "Good boy," he whispered. "Thank you for not letting me walk away." Ghost's tail thumped against the porch. In the distance, an eagle soared over the peaks, free and wild and alive. If this story of courage, loyalty, and redemption touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist, that hope is real, and that one act of courage can change everything. Hit that subscribe button for more stories that celebrate the extraordinary in ordinary people, and comment below. Tell us what courage means to you. Have you ever had to choose between walking away and standing up? We read every comment, and your stories inspire us. Before you go, we want to pray for you. We pray that God gives you the strength of Marcus, the loyalty of Ghost, the courage of Sarah, Jake, and David. We pray that when your moment comes, when someone needs you, you'll have the courage to act. We pray that you'll never walk past suffering without stopping, that you'll be the person someone's life depends on. If this message resonates with your spirit, if you believe that courage is a choice we all must make, type Amen in the comments below. Let us know you're part of this community. Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay brave, and remember, you're never alone.